Alldus podcast is brought to you by Alldus International, supplying your expert AI and digital transformation staffing needs across the US and Europe. Today, you are listening to our AI in Action series, where leading minds in AI from across the world share their story, success, and advice. AI in Action cuts through the hype and explores the true impact of artificial intelligence in our world today.
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Arun Nagarajan. Arun is the CTO at BigSpring. Arun, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, we've been looking forward to this one for a while.
Yeah.
So, Arun, let's start with yourself. Can you give us a brief background of your journey in tech? Where did you get started? Some of the roles you've held along the way, and take us up to today as the CTO at BigSpring.
Yeah, great. I always do my intro reverse chronologically, but it's always nice to go back to the roots and proceed forward. Yeah, so I got started in tech. Actually, I went to school to study mathematics, and computer science was almost like an afterthought. And it was like my minor or second major that I was considering. But then when it came time to finding jobs that pay, this is summer of 2000, my first internship. The best offer I got was writing some software at the Human Resources Department at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And it was an awesome experience. I was helping convert some of these old legacy payroll apps into modern web-based apps. And I was getting to some of these projects fast enough that I had plenty of time to play with lots of random side projects. And it was really an amazing sort of internship. So I really feel that was the first time where I felt, wow, I could do this for a living. And both I'm decent at it and I enjoy it. So I went back there for an internship. And then in the semester after, I did 2 internships there. And then I started doing a campus programming job, doing some tooling around educational resources, Center for Educational Resources. And we built a tool called Timeline Creator as a pedagogical tool where you could take a historical series of events, let's say things around World War II, and represent them in a nice graphical web app. It was built on Flash, if you can remember that. So it was a Java app on the desktop emitting some metadata that was consumed by a Flash player for students to play with. So very cool early days of messing around with stuff. So that was my real intro to really picking computer science as a profession. After I graduated, I spent a few months trying to do some research computing work on, back before things were called big data, this Center for Imaging Sciences in Johns Hopkins, where we're doing fMRI data on mouse brain, trying to find patterns and match them to things. Very interesting stuff, but I realized research was not for me. And I ended up taking this other opportunity with a consulting company turning into a product company. This is back in early 2003. And that's my first sort of professional full-time job, I would say. I was there for 9.5 years, almost a decade. An amazing run where we were building mobile applications from the early days of Palm OS, Windows Mobile back in the day, and BlackBerry and all that good stuff. So writing apps before the App Store. Adventurous times, and did that for quite a while. Really grew up there in terms of people leadership, technology leadership, product management, just all the complexities of building and scaling a company that was going through a bunch of iterations rapidly alongside an industry that was exploding. By 2007, iPhone launched, 2008, App Store launched, 2009, Android's first consumer-grade device launches with the G1, 2010, iPad comes out. So like really every year something massive shift was happening in the mobile era back then. So that was my first sort of long tenured role, almost 10 years. Then I went to, wanted a different flavor, went over to Google to work on Google Docs and Drive back when I think there were still about 40,000 people, I think. And now it's 100-something thousand people. And I was in the New York office and helped launch the early integrations and API surface areas around Google Sheets and Docs. So if you're on Google Sheets and you see an add-ons menu there, something, I was a part of the launch for, a small team that built and shipped that. Lots of really interesting security and capability challenges and distribution challenges of those things. So that was a really eye-opening sort of experience, just not just hardcore engineering that's products used by hundreds of millions of people, new and exciting for me, but also just getting stuff done at a bigger company and working cross-functionally. So that was exciting. And then I should say, after that, I went to a small startup, trying my hand at a startup. This was in the location sharing space. Interesting app idea, really interesting sort of UI design and product experience, but it's hard to bootstrap a new social network, I felt, so it didn't quite work out. I then went over to Uber, where I was there for 5 years and really helped build and scale the New York tech office from a dozen people now to about 350 people in tech. Built and launched the Uber Eats business back in December 2015. By the time I left in July 2020, we were selling about $30 billion of food a year. Couple dozen countries, I think. So in rapid scale, that was a roller coaster of a ride, and really enjoyed every bit of it, ups and downs. I learned a lot about leading through chaos and shaping products that are constantly evolving, taking bets, solidifying those bets into actual products. That was a fun ride. And then, about a year ago, I was excited. It was ready for me. I was ready to make a new leap, and here I am at BigSpring. We are a enterprise productivity product, a software as a service product that is focused on upskilling, driving productivity within an enterprise through investing in people's skills and knowledge. And we do that in a measurable and a dynamic way. So that's a little bit about where I am now. I lead a small team here as the CTO. We're about 25 people, 3.5 years old, and scaling rapidly. So that's my journey. I know that was a bit long-winded. Hopefully it was useful.
No, it was great. It was compelling. And I'm glad you shared it in such detail, because quite a career journey thus far. That time at Uber, obviously incredible, 5 years, and the growth that happened during that time under your leadership is amazing. So you've given a brief overview of BigSpring, but I want to get your take on what drew you to BigSpring, and then after you touch on that, if you can give us some insight into the types of projects, maybe some examples of the work that you and your team is currently doing.
Yeah. What drew me to BigSpring, besides all the great folks and Bhakti, the founder, on down, to me, that people really matter. So that's like, in my mind, just an easy answer. So I'll skip the easy part and give you a little bit more of the insight into, I was really thinking about the future of workspace for a while. In having directly led a team of 150 cross-functional people across a couple offices, and then transitioning to remote during COVID, I really realized that there's just a huge gap in sort of the art and science of organizing and running teams. I think probably management as a science was probably coined and invented around the 50s and 60s, but I don't think a lot of that really anticipated the pace of change and innovation that's happening right now. 10 years ago, in that article Mark Andreessen wrote about software eating the world, I think that's now in its second decade. It's conquered the world, but the challenge now is really talent and organizing talent and executing against plans. I think people generally know how broken sort of work can be sometimes in terms of communicating and organizing knowledge and knowing what is important, knowing what to prioritize, all that stuff. And then just training, right? Education of new product launches, education of new procedures, new policies, all that is a huge gap. So I really felt the state of the art was this notion of LMS. It's an acronym that coined in the 90s, before really internet or social media or phones or anything really came about. So I felt like there's this huge opportunity in this space and almost like a responsibility to innovate. And that's what got me excited in the space of future of work and some of the investment that is to be made there. Yeah, so that got me interested in the space, and then met Bhakti and really got to know the product vision. I was blown away by the simplicity and also the ambition of the vision of wanting to build an upskilling platform that is mobile first, but accessible for the entire world in an enterprise-led model. And I was eager to get started. So that was what drew me to it. And we're an early stage startup still in many ways, but we have a lot of hallmarks of early success that we're building upon and scaling rapidly. Yeah, that's a little bit about BigSpring.
You are listening to the Alldus podcast. When you're looking to scale your team, or if you are interested in showcasing your company in a future episode, reach out today. Or if you're in the market for a new role, visit our website to view open positions, www.alldus.com.
Although it's been a few years, BigSpring is still a startup, there's been some rapid expansion and great success. Can you give us a few examples of that, the type of work that you're doing with some of your enterprise customers, and in the year that you've been, despite the challenges of the pandemic, what has it been like?
Yeah, it's been in some ways super complicated always to join a new team, new company in the middle of a pandemic. I met most of my team just a few weeks ago here in New York. So awesome to always meet people in person and get to besides just getting into work and over Zoom, which is always good to focus on that, but and the personal relationships, all that, I think I'm really excited to get us back in the office and all that good stuff over time. So yeah, in terms of some examples of what BigSpring does, I'll give you two examples. One is Google happens to be a customer. They launched last year and in the middle of the pandemic. And to me, that was a really exciting and a hallmark customer in many ways. One, because they have high taste and demand a lot from their partners like us, and awesome to have a company like them as a customer this early on to help you push the product on the envelope there. And then the use case itself was very exciting. So Google, they make lots of ads products. Some of them are industry leading in many ways. And for them, a big challenge as they continue to innovate is the product updates that are shipped on the ads products, whether it's bidding technologies or various targeting technologies. Those technologies are not rapidly adopted by their customers. And oftentimes that leads to loss of revenue growth or support issues, or just generally not seeing product innovation get to market faster. So a challenge that they identified was, hey, I am actually not investing enough in making our users, our media agencies and other partners better at using our product. And that's where BigSpring came in. So they're using us to deploy video-based training that is bi-directional, where they get visibility in the actual expertise of the end users through the BigSpring platform. Hundreds of media agency practitioners around the world, use BigSpring to learn new skills and new capabilities within the Google Ads ecosystem, and then more importantly, answer questions, demonstrate their proficiency, share screenshots, video recordings back to their peers and others to actually build a ecosystem of knowledge that's being built upon the initial training. So that's a really exciting use case, very much sort of knowledge worker based. The other interesting use case is a bit more broader ecosystem oriented, which is a bank in West Africa called Carbon Finance, and they are using BigSpring to train their customers that happen to be small to medium businesses through West Africa on financial literacy. Highly impactful work, markets where there isn't lots of access to capital, there isn't a well-formed credit agency in some cases, and this bank is investing in their customers and becoming more financially savvy so they can borrow responsibly and understand what that entails and of course pay that back and be good customers as well. Amazing. But at the end of the day, this is enabling a whole second and third order effect of business creation and scale. So those two use cases are, in my mind, some of the more proven and rapidly scaling ones that we're super excited.
I think, look, first and foremost, for brand recognition and confidence in what you're doing, to have Google on board at this stage really speaks to the belief that they have in you and the success of the product. But then equally, the story with Carbon, it really ties nicely into being a mission-driven organization and the impact that BigSpring can have. You and I were talking before we hit record about your work as an engineer, and obviously the topic of our podcast is AI in action, and the main goal is to actually cut through the hype behind AI and have individuals working in data tell their story. As somebody who's grown through the ranks from individual engineers to a director, worked at some of the biggest, most well-known tech companies in the world. Now as a CTO, where you're hiring data engineers, you're hiring data scientists, can you give us some insight into the current landscape of how you viewed the market of AI and then on the flip side, what it's like at BigSpring, so how you're utilizing your data engineers and data scientists.
Yeah, so I think we knew enough to start looking for data engineers and data analysts and product folks that are very data oriented pretty much right away. We have a pretty solid data-driven culture. We use a bunch of tools, some off the shelf, some homegrown, some commercial, some open source, all over the place. Early days of a startup, the most important thing is to be as oriented on data as possible, not necessarily following everything data tells you, but at least building the pipelines and organizing that. And I bring up data first before ML or anything else like that, because as probably most folks that have really dabbled in anything production grade with ML is, productionizing machine learning models is often just data engineering at scale. Most of the model building, model validation, model tuning, that becomes iterative and manageable once you have a really good handle on your data and you can reliably and consistently shape and ship data. So that's why we started with the data side, both to answer immediate day-to-day questions and then set up the stage for our next generation investments into more sophisticated machine learning processes. So what we're seeing out in the field is, in terms of the candidates and the profiles we speak with, there are folks that are just extremely good at more academic machine learning rigor, whether through classes they've taken, projects they've done, but fail to see even the sophistication of difference between offline and online machine learning prediction and just the complexities involved in that. I think there's recently this term ML has come on, which is operationalizing machine learning and managing that at scale and through observability and other sort of debugging. But I do think this is like a big gap in the industry where it's now, instead of giving people more tools to self-manage, it's splitting off into its own separate sort of science and discipline. I feel that could backfire in a bit, especially as a startup. We can't, both for just the human communication costs and just the latency of that, we can't have separate specialists for the training, the serving, the productionizing side of things. So to me, we're looking for sort of hybrid engineers that are just very good at shaping data, understanding data, and then being able to run fairly widely available best practices-based models that are out there. A lot of times, just the off-the-shelf ones are quite sophisticated these days. You can get a high degree of accuracy with them. And then more importantly, being able to connect that to product priorities and technical know-how to ship them in production. So that's what, as a startup, that we always value. It's the end-to-end mindset. It's the end-to-end awareness and all the pitfalls with all the little things along the way. Of course, that'll never be as deep as a potential specialist, but I think they'll be a lot faster, a lot more iterating in terms of how quickly they can ship. So that's a trend that we're looking for in our hiring, is someone that can see the bigger picture and own something end to end. Yeah, I think that's one topic, and I'll pause there. I can keep going about hiring and what we're looking for.
Yeah, this again leads nicely into my final question for you, which is, look, you've been with BigSpring now for a year, and despite the challenges of the pandemic, it's been an incredible year for both you personally and the company. As you look ahead for continued growth of the company as a whole, but more importantly, your team specifically focusing on the engineers and data scientists that you talked about. What are you most excited about, and where do you expect BigSpring to be in 18 to 24 months from now?
Yeah, so it's a huge sort of exciting next year and a half for us as we hire up more and more folks in our data team, our product team, design team. And what we're trying to tackle at BigSpring is it's at the root of it, measurable productivity gain through skilling. And those are three sort of very big, ambitious things, right? Measurability towards productivity through knowledge dissemination, skilling, right? And each of those pillars, in my mind, requires some focused product work, focused engineering to withstand, I should say, the scale and the amount of like daily active and monthly active users we get. And then of course, innovation, like trying new things, experimenting. That is going to be the big thing that I'm most excited about. So to me, when I look back at what we've done over the last year is really laid down the foundation for rapid innovation. And as we hit the gas pedal this year, to me, what success looks like, what the future looks like, iterating on some of these promising feature set, things like Pro Score, things like the individualized recommendations and portfolio, AI-based coaching. We didn't get a chance to get into each of these functionality, but I am ecstatic about the capabilities and the consequences of each of these sort of feature set. And that's what it's going to be about. It's going to be about listening to our customers, working closely with customers, and iterating on new features towards these sort of bigger pictures.
Arun, thank you so much for coming on today and talking to us. I appreciate you sharing your journey, your background. You've worked at some amazing organizations. And then obviously with BigSpring, you've given us some great insight into who BigSpring is as a company. The examples that you gave of recent use case applications are powerful. And it sounds like a fun place to work for somebody who's interested in modern data science, data engineering, machine learning, those sorts of things. So we wish you and the team all the best for the year ahead. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks so much, JP.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Alldus Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any Android podcast of choice. You can also head over to our website, www.alldus.com, to listen to more podcasts, view our open roles, and stay up to date with industry news. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more great episodes coming very soon.